All right. Welcome back to the Bookworm Games podcast. After years, we have reconnected for another episode, and it's high time that we discuss. Well, uh, I think this time is a bit of a warm up for a future discussion of the timely AI topic, but tonight we're going to talk about memory. So, welcome back, Jace. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you for inviting me again on your podcast. I really enjoyed the first two episodes we did on Xenogears. That went a lot deeper than I could ever have imagined a discussion on Xenogears could be.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
um, yeah, glad to be back, and thank you for letting me choose the topic of conversation today, which, as you mentioned, is memory. And I was hoping we could give our two separate perspectives.
Yeah,
Me being an artist, and you're also an artist as well, but also a teacher, which I feel like gives you an extra relevant perspective on the effect of our relationship with memory in the current day.
sure. Sure. I mean, from my standpoint, I feel constantly like I have important things that are just out of my grasp that I should be remembering, whether it's things that I need to do or thoughts that I wanted to develop more and maybe put into some kind of articulate, expression. So personally, my experience, my perspective is that memory is incredibly fraught
Mm.
these days, and that might just be the stage of life that I'm at. But I can't help but think it must have something to do with the context as well, and particularly the technological change that we experience. And so when I observe students, when I observe other people, my sense is that they are, not used to needing to remember as much as when I was a student I did, right? There's not as much emphasis on recall, on specific facts and figures, and even when I was going through school, I think that was already sort of the sense that my own teachers had was that as time goes on, the emphasis on those kinds of questions, uh, you know, it's just less important and less so as our ability to search for and maybe hallucinate those kinds of things without consequence is increasing and by leaps and bounds all the time. I particularly though think about memory as you mentioned in terms of of the connection to poetry, to art, to kind of aesthetic experience. Um, so the main way that I kind of get uh, practice using my memory nowadays is by playing video games and then talking about them, basically, right? And so whether it's like short term, like I just played this part of the game and now I'm discussing it with my friend Alex on our weekly or more or less weekly conversations, or whether it's me, writing about an old game at length with an appeal to my deeper long-term memories. That that kind of uh, yeah, I'll just use the word practice again, I guess. Um, I find it incredibly valuable, and I think that art has an important role to play in preserving, enriching, making more useful the faculties of memory that we have in us, such as they are, such as they are these days. And I wonder if that's kind of the direction that you're going with this. I'm not sure. I'm curious why you chose this topic and what your thoughts are about it as an artist and a writer.
Yeah, what you just mentioned is definitely a part of it. I liked that you brought up that you engage with art as an enjoyer. You play these video games, but at the same time, you're creating content, you're elaborating on your own perspectives. And I think that that is like the key difference. There have been studies that show, because we like to put social media as sort of the primary villain
Mm.
when it comes to attention spans, people's worsening memories. But there have been studies that have shown that it's really only the passive use of social media, just doom scrolling, watching reel after reel,
Mhm.
that contributes to either cognitive decline or depressive symptoms. But active uses of social media, even just liking things or writing comments under videos, um, doesn't have those effects and actually have the opposite effects. So if you're uploading your own content, you're creating an essay about something and posting it online, those uses of social media are actually quite beneficial to memory. Um, and yeah, I think that's one part of it, because I would say this is kind of a thought I'm building,
Mhm.
and I'll ask you your opinion of it. But I kind of feel that the act of creating the process of art is almost identical to memory itself. Um, you had sent me the link to Plato's Phaedrus, and he mentions that, his worry is that written language. I'm not taking it to this extreme, but that written language would decrease one's memory capabilities because it's not requiring the person to internalize the memory. It has this external archive that they can, verify things and remember for them. Um, and at that time, a lot of people they remembered things using um, a strategy called method of loci, which I'm sure you probably have heard of or are familiar with. And what you basically do with that is that you create this room with objects, and these objects are these loci which you can use to input information that you need to remember. And as you go through this room, you create this narrative, you create this story that links them all together. And I would say that that's essentially art. You're creating a story, you're creating a narrative. And I think that's the primary way that our brains remember things. There's rote memorization, but increasingly it seems like that is a method that is inefficient, it's not very permanent, it can be very exhaustive. And I think art is a way to introduce new strategies for remembering and for strengthening our memories. And unfortunately, I feel like more and more technological advances, one particular one that you mentioned at the beginning, are making it so that people aren't using that strategy in order to preserve their memories and strengthen their memories, etc.
Yes. No, yeah, as when you brought up the topic, I thought of that, that dialogue and that particular passage in which the invention of writing comes in for pretty harsh critique. Yeah, maybe an overblown critique, but maybe a kind of archetypal critique as well, right? This is sort of like every new technology can become the boogeyman for the old folks, the generation that knew times before it. And and yeah, so the you mentioned the memory strategies that were used, particularly by like speakers. They wanted to keep track of their arguments and make sure that they bring them out in the most effective order, or to persuade an audience to use um, all their powers of rhetoric. There is an elaborate classical art to these kinds of these skills, and now we have teleprompters, right? We have
Right.
uh, I don't know. I've never given a speech that was that consequential, but I certainly like to make notes and kind of put down on paper my thoughts. And so I've always kind of seen it the opposite, right? I find writing to be an incredible aid to memory, even for the purposes of viva voce conversation or speech or whatever it is. Um, those things work hand in hand, and I could in a charitable moment see a proponent of new technologies saying that, well, this is a tool like any other. It's going to ultimately enhance the human experience, and they could make a persuasive case for that, I'm sure. But my my own sense is that you're absolutely right that when it comes to seeing students or people in general at their best with their memory, it's when it's in the form of some kind of story. I think that, I mean, examples that come to mind just from today when I have students give presentations, they struggle if it's about, facts and details. That takes a lot more practice and that takes a lot more work for them to get that in a form that's compelling for an audience. Whereas if they're just telling us a story about, I have a video game class, of course, and so they get to talk about a video game that they find interesting for some reason. They get to tell us why. Um, they do a great job because that's all, at the tip of their tongue. They have the lore, they have maybe some stories about the development, and the marketing and the way that the game interacts with the player and vice versa. And so this is all just they don't need to prep it very much is what I'm saying because it is in some sense more internalized for them. Um, they didn't, set up their memory palace or anything like that necessarily, but something like that happened when they were engaging with that art form. And, kids can tell me for, way more time than I should let them about the lore of a new Spider-Man video game or Warhammer 40K or whatever. They just are they're steeped in that stuff. And and so I don't, I'm ultimately not too pessimistic, I guess, because I can see that, there is something that's still very vibrant there, and it's not at all compromised, from what I can tell, by the layering on top of these experiences by other kinds of technology. Uh, with that said, I mean, if there were to be such a technology that were so compelling that you never stop scrolling, right? A kind of nightmare version of TikTok or something, and you never got into a longer form story, than the 10 seconds, 30 seconds, then I could, I could probably uh, uh, start to smash some computers or something. I'm not sure what I would do at that point. Yeah.
So you're already envisioning a Neo-Luddite revolution that you want to head in the
Uh,
future.
I think we would have to use more sophisticated methods, but yes, I am very much well. So, to take another sort of random example, like Fahrenheit 451, right? The the response of fighting back directly may or may not be successful, but the response of committing to memory important stories and books and myths and things that I could really get behind the nonviolent approach that we get at the end of that book. I like a lot.
Well, you could also even appeal to people's egocentrism.
Yeah.
Like you pointed out, the reason why people are able to remember things so well and so easily when they attach their own sort of personal feelings to a topic is because we remember things that are personal, that are deeply attached to our sense of identity. And so I kind of think of the extreme, like you said, the perfect sort of scrolling, addictive, like social media platform that just gives people everything they want. Just even imagine technology that is 100% reliable and can provide that external archive for everything that you ever need to know. And just in that situation, at what point does our memory atrophy to where we actually lose a sense of reality? We lose our own sense of identity.
Mm.
And so I think that it's the wrong way to approach it to think that, well, these are tools that make memory, certain types of memory or certain levels of memory obsolete. I would say that's the wrong way to look at it because, yes, I think technology can provide that. Not everything needs to be fully sort of internalized the way Plato's talking about. There's a lot of information, a lot of uh, just things that we need to know that we don't have to have at that level of internalization. But I feel like we do need a certain level of memory just to maintain our own senses of self. And so even if we do adopt new technology, in order to assist with daily life. At the same time, I think we shouldn't let go to those older, more traditional practices in order to just strengthen our memories just for our own personal flourishing, just for our own, um, I could even say like humanity.
Yeah.
We think of, the extreme example of amnesia as a complete loss of personal identity. And so I would assume that the opposite, just this very strong core memory, it enhances your identity.
People talk about core memories all the time. I don't know if that was before Inside Out or after that movie, but I, I also, I mean, on the amnesia thing, I have a lot of thoughts. This was one of the places my mind went when you proposed this topic as well was, of course, video games and lots of pop culture. The amnesiac hero, the protagonist who has no memory or has little flashes of memory that, are dropped at important plot moments. This is, you know, this is classic. And and I think the most interesting take on that, personally, of course, I'm biased, but I think Earthbound does a really interesting thing with that kind of um, embedding of memories into the plot of the game, where you're playing as a child, and the memories that he's forgotten or that are highlighted are ones from his very earliest infancy. And so these
Mm.
are the memories that all of us forget or at best can kind of barely remember, right? Um, Prior to our real consciousness or the formation of our identity as a distinct being, really. We're so dependent as infants. And and as you go through the game, you use these places around the world where these memories kind of well up in the main character, and he sees these flashes of himself as a child and this and that. And I just think it's the most beautiful, video game experience that one can have. But actually, Breath of the Wild does a really similar thing, to take a much more recent example. And I've heard really good things about Disco Elysium, which has this kind of trope as well, and Xenogears and Final Fantasy VII, and on and on and on. Um, but as far as like the identity thing, another kind of troubling example when I work with students on their autobiographical writing assignments, on the one hand, I can see how like us assigning them things to write about themselves is kind of uncomfy for them. They don't like it most of the time. As much as we have great, good intentions for this, trying to get them to write about their name, who are you named after, what family name, what meanings, this is they have a really complicated relationship with their own names, a lot of them, and their families, and so they don't want to. They push back a lot. But the weirdest thing, or I don't know, maybe it's not, but for me, it's very strange when they come back at us with, but I just don't remember anything. They will say that.
Mm.
They will say, I have no memories. I can't write about
Right.
anything because I don't remember. And it's just like, well, clearly that's not true. But why would you feel that way? What has happened to you such that you claim that you have nothing to write about? It's just so, yeah, I haven't come up with a good, uh, comeback for that. Just maybe I'll try to say kind of what you said, like appeal to the sense of self, the sense of self-worth, the selfishness, like not to put too fine a point on it. Like, yes, of course, you're a distinct person, and you're not just a consumer. You must have something that you can tell me about yourself. So yeah, I'm not sure, but that one always gets me. Because it's a lot like assigning books, like once you assign this book and they have to read it, suddenly they will find everything wrong with it. They'll dismiss it out of hand. But um, it's so painful because like, oh, but this is Huckleberry Finn or whatever, this is Crime and Punishment. This is a great book. Like you if you give it a chance. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I want to touch upon what you said about your students, one saying that they just don't remember, or maybe the memories are difficult to sort of directly concentrate on or think about or unearth. I think another way that art is really important in terms of our memories is that it gives us more agency to be able to think about our memories and to contextualize them and to give them meaning that is more integrated with our senses of selves, but also makes it easier for us to deal with them and to really mine them for as much benefit as possible. And I think that's something that is a skill that should be taught early on. Um, I think journaling or even visualizing experiences that kids have in drawings, comics. I remember I'm sure a lot of kids still do this, but I remember so many kids when I was growing up made their own comics,
Yeah.
and a lot of them were just based on experiences that they've had. Um, and yeah, so I think just the lack of funding in arts education, the treatment of the arts as being, you know, not necessary, the first things to be cut in any curriculum, I think is doing a great disservice in giving just kids, but people in general, agency over how to contextualize their own histories. Because otherwise, I think it makes you more susceptible to other people's contextualizing and meaning making out of your own biographical history.
I mean, it's got to be right. And you start to wonder at a certain point if there's an intention behind the axing of arts education and the attempts to seemingly roll back protections for special education students and grants for students to go to college and all of these like very large scale structures of that have opened a lot of doors in education for a lot of people are kind of systematically being, you know, done away with, just basically trashed. And it's almost like people out there might benefit from students not having a lot of agency and power over their own narratives and ability to craft a meaningful identity rather than a sort of like, caricature of one that they're sort of handed. So yeah, I mean, I try
It,
not to get like too conspiracy about it, but it kind of seems that way sometimes. Yeah.
it's so funny that you bring that up and you mention it being a conspiracy because I was actually a little afraid to broach the topic, but I feel like if you did have that goal, if an authoritarian power did have that goal of reducing people's agency, artists have historically been really good at counteracting top-down narratives, rhetoric,
Yeah.
because they're exercising that muscle. I mean, when you're exercising your brain's ability to create your own meanings out of things, to establish your own framework for your identity and your life, yeah, dismantling that it would reduce a lot of people's personal power. So can't say that that's a specific goal that certain people have, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, absolutely. And it just, I mean, it's so valuable, right? I mean, in a monetary sense, it's so valuable to have people be willing to kind of join up and take in and sit with and satiate themselves on a lot of content that isn't necessarily that expensive to produce or that hard to process or that requires a lot of careful thought and deliberation, right? So
Hmm.
I think, yeah, the authoritarian or the governmental side of it, but also the kind of corporate or industrial side of it, like those are very powerful forces that one would ideally see kind of, balancing each other in some way, right? The government should kind of be establishing protectives against the uh, the encroachments of industry and corporate interest. But in fact, right now it seems like they're kind of working hand in hand, and that's really scary. And I just think, you know, the the amount of detachment of conflict of various kinds, but really superficial conflict at a certain point. Um, the ways in which people are struggling to connect, right? I think that's very much. I think it has to be bound up with this discussion of memory, and I think it is also a related danger of the kinds of mediated experiences that people spend so much of their time engaged in, right? If because speaking again from teaching in schools, if the numbers of kids who have really hard times kind of in social interactions because of mental health issues like depression and anxiety and just basic needs are not being met for them, like food and safe places to stay, they're really not ready to learn, for one thing, and they're also, I mean, just as their experience of the world is just so much um, more more impoverished. It's more there's a lot of suffering there, and it's hard to see. But every year it seems like there are more and more students who have all sorts of um, diagnosed and undiagnosed, difficulties with relating to other people and just sort of basic skills and things like that. And and I guess um, I don't have a like solid thesis on why that is exactly, but my sense is that it's got to be in some way related to this this tendency, uh, this tension, at least with the kinds of stories. It's just, yeah, the stories that we tell and the stories that we're able to tell as a society, as families, as communities. Um, it's you know it's a lot to ask of schools to somehow build those things back up without major support for things like arts education. Um, Even with all that, I think it would be a lot to ask, but certainly uh, it's a tall order. There's a lot of social institutions that we would have to build up in some way to really address it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a multifaceted problem, and I think there's a lot of um, it's sort of like a circular feedback thing.
Mhm.
Because this is another thing I was thinking about because we often try to find a single variable that explains the issues with all of this, and usually that's social media, or even what we're calling brain rot, which is just any sort of like low quality media that's more addictive than edifying, I guess. Um, but sometimes I wonder if the reason why people are drawn to those types of media is also because short-term memories are lessening, are becoming worse for external factors that are have nothing to do with media at all.
Mm.
Just recently, obviously, COVID has had an incalculable effect on people's memory. I would say just even effects on with diet, the amount of just like blue light affecting, like people can't sleep now.
Yeah.
Work schedules are very haphazard. And so I wonder if, again, it's like two things feeding into each other. You have people's worsening memories due to environmental factors, making it so that it's more enjoyable to watch something where the beginning and middle and end is with either within a few minutes or even less than a minute because you there's very little taxation on your memory.
Yeah.
And the more you watch those kinds of media, that also doesn't, doesn't cause you to strengthen your memory, to work out your memory. And so it's kind of like a vicious cycle. And I actually have a personal um, anecdote. In my 20s, I actually had a very awful short-term memory, just really terrible, to the point where I would be in a conversation with someone and I would forget what they had said seconds ago. Even if my attention was directly on them, I was focused on what they were saying to the point where I actually thought I was suffering hearing loss. Like it wasn't obvious to me that what was happening was that my memory had issues that I needed to resolve. And it caused a lot of social anxiety. I was actually very reluctant to get into conversations with people, especially strangers, because I was afraid that they would think that I was either not paying attention to them or that I was awkward because I literally just wasn't remembering what they were saying.
Wow.
And I read this book called Memory Power by Scott Hagwood, who's like this memory champion,
Uh-huh.
someone also who had a very bad memory. And that's where I learned about, excuse me, that's where I learned about, method of loci, Roman room. And, I actually practice
Oh, cool.
those, I practiced those things. And within a week, I was able to memorize an entire deck of cards, like as they were being shown to me. So it's
Cool.
it's literally just a skill that you can develop. Excuse me, I'm gonna have a coughing fit here.
It's okay.
But the broader point is that memory is something that is a skill. It's not a good memory or a bad memory is not inherent in most people. It's something you can develop. It's something you can develop with daily activities like art.
Yeah.
And it's important to develop because short-term memory, you might even not know it at the time, but your memory also greatly affects the way you're able to socialize with people. And that's another sort of vicious cycle where you avoid socialization because of the effects your memory will have on that socialization. And socialization is also a way to practice your memory because you have to be very cognizant of what someone is talking to you about. You have to remember important biographical information about them. It is a practice in memory as well. And so I think breaking out of this vicious cycle is important in the present day as well.
So you'd recommend the Hagwood's memory power as a kind of place to start?
I don't think it's necessary. I think it's an interesting sort of personal um, memoir about someone's journey from having a very poor memory to being a memory champion. But I don't think it's necessary at all. And in fact, I don't think it's even necessary to use like ancient techniques that,
Okay.
like famous orators have used in
Yeah.
order to remember an entire stadium worth of like dignitaries. I honestly think just any kind of artistic practice
Okay.
um, where you're required to observe and remember what you observe is enough. I think that
Mm,
would greatly improve most people's memories, and it wouldn't even require a lot of time every single day.
yeah.
I think passive passive consumption of media as opposed to an active creative life, like they need to be in balance. I think as long as you get those in balance, that would get you 90% of the way there. And if you wanted to take it even further and you know create your own memory palace or
Yeah.
involve yourself in even more difficult forms of art making, that's even better. But I think for the average person, just any kind of creative pursuit would
Yeah.
vastly improve their memories.
That's that's inspiring. I know this is a bit abrupt, but because I am on the free version of this, we have about 4 minutes to go. I will just throw out that one other thing my school does is we do a 5 minute silent meditation time every morning. That's the first thing that we do when the day begins with the students, and it's one of the few things that is like, you know, non-negotiable about our very progressive school. So we shut the door, we turn off the lights, we ring a bell, like just a an actual bell, or on the smart board we have the sound of that bell, and and then it's silent for 5 minutes in the whole building, and everyone is just meditating, contemplating, doing whatever they need to do to prepare for the day. And and I wonder if something like that, a kind of um, processing without, too much stimulation or too much going on is just really hard to find time for unless you really firmly carve it out. And whether it's journaling, making art, uh, making music, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things that, yeah, just contribute to what I think you called earlier flourishing. And they're not easy to prioritize adequately because they make people harder to manipulate, frankly, right? They're uh, they're building those people up into more formidable human beings. So yeah,
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to find time for these things, but I think it's worth the investment because it probably will make everything that requires memory, which is practically everything in our lives, a bit easier. And I think the return on investment would, you know, overwhelm the initial costs almost immediately.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, shall we leave it there for tonight? So yeah,
Yeah, I think
I'll
this is a good sort of like micro podcast to
yeah.
sort of like broach a topic. So yeah,
I
yeah.
hope that was helpful for you as you're marshaling your thoughts on this. You know, I think I can see how this fits into a larger project about the role of art in society and in people's health, like you're talking about. So I'm looking forward to continuing this. Yeah, maybe in the next few weeks here. Although this is a busy time of year, so totally understand if it's a bit longer. But thanks again.
Great. Yeah, this was very helpful. Thanks, Wes.
Okay, take care.
All right, you too. Bye.
See ya.